Hi, how are you? Hope you're doing well. I wanted to discuss a couple of odd, random things today that I've seen over and over again in students that I meet. How do I say this? That, they've been playing for a number of years, and then I end up meeting them and they, come to work with me, or I discover certain things after the initial year or two that a student is working with me, and often some of these situations are with adult students. I think adult students, especially adult beginners, I think they're kind of a special breed. First of all, I love them because they always give me a new perspective. It's very different to see how the adult, brain assimilates new information. And there are definitely advantages and there are definitely challenges to adults, learning violin for the first time. But it's funny that I think sometimes they might have a little bit more of a self consciousness. Certain things do crop up. So, very random couple of topics. So, first topic is a mute. Okay. There are two general types of mutes, and there are many hundreds of different types of mutes. Okay, so uh, you know, uh, the two general, I guess, classifications, of mutes are the mutes where you perform with them, and they're usually like of a smaller nature, and there's practice mutes, and those are larger mutes. They're more heavy duty, and they're meant to practice. They're not meant to be performed with. Now, you might ask, well, why do you need a mute? And so, if you're kind of like a self taught violinist and you're watching, YouTube videos, then you might never have, had any need, to use a mute. But typically, if you've been playing in orchestra for, at least some time, you have needed a mute. If you want me to discuss mutes in a different video, then please leave a comment below. I can definitely go more in depth about mutes. But for today, I just want to say whether it's the standard mute or the practice mute, uh, you should not be playing with them too much. Okay. I'm just going to come right out and say it. So you should not be playing with a mute on very much at all. Okay. You should only be using a mute when the music calls for it. So the music will say consordino. And, there are some solo violin, works that require a mute, but it's not very common. And there are commonly orchestra parts that need mutes. So, it's an effect, right? So the composer will ask, all the orchestra or certain sections of the orchestra to put on a mute for a section of the piece that is supposed to, evoke a certain mood. And so they will, put the players will put the mute on for a given section, and then they'll remove it, and then the, piece will go on. Um, so that's the only time you should be using a mute, is when you're playing that music. So whether you're practicing that music that says concertino, or you're performing the music, or you're rehearsing the music that says concertino. So can you tell this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine? So only when the music calls for it should you be using the mute. And often I will practice without the mute on because I just want to practice it by myself, at home. And then I'll just put the mute on sometimes, because that way I can, hear things a bit more clearly. And the practice mute, the larger heavy duty mute, you should only be using it if you're in a place that you cannot disturb, the surrounding people. So when I've used practice mutes in the past is when, I had a performance and I traveled, right? I was like flying to another country or a different state, and I had a performance the next day and I was staying in a hotel, and I really, really badly needed to practice, and it was after hours, after, quiet hours, right, had begun. Or, like you're in a dorm, or you're in a home and you're a guest and you don't want to disturb people. Anytime where you really, really have to practice, but you can't be making noise, that's when you should use a practice mute. And to be honest, even I don't even really use it too much then. Had been only, a few times where I really, really needed a practice mute. So it is good to have one, but you really shouldn't be using it. So you ask, why am I talking about this? I have come across a fair number of students that play with their mute all the time. Whether it's the little one or the large one, they just practice with it all the time. And typically what I've found, I want to be delicate, but it's usually because they're self-conscious. So they either, been told by family members that they sound bad, or they think they don't sound good. And by putting a mute on, it sounds better. Like it kind of minimizes the screechy or scratchy or unpleasant sounds or the out of tuneness. And if they play out of tune and they really don't like it, or something like anything unpleasant, it sort of tones it down, and they practice that way. And so usually it's the more sensitive soul. So if you are a person who practices and plays a lot, like majority of the time you're using a mute, you know who you are. Please do not. Okay, so you shouldn't be. Um, it's important because if you keep playing that way, you're conditioning your ear, right? Like violin is a lot of ear training. You have to train your ear, and the ear training happens whether you like it or not. It's like every time you play the violin, your ear is becoming, conditioned, and so you don't want the sound you're hearing to always be like this. And also it will everything will kind of sound, like streamlined. And so you're not going to really seek and desire the ranges, right? That we should be having in music, like fortes and pianos, but not only just dynamics, it's like the character. You want to have certain tone color, something more bright and flamboyant and more extroverted, right? And then they're like the more inward, reflective times, or the articulations you're doing, like you can't really hear whether you're getting a nice staccato, for example, on every single note, if you have the mute on. So there are just a lot of things that, it's not going to respond the same way as if you didn't have a mute on. So I don't want to go on too long on this topic because I'm hoping that most of you out there are not this person, okay? But I think it's important to address, and so I just wanted to let you know that you shouldn't be doing that. In if you are, then I would say find the confidence, right, by using other means. So maybe you just need to work on your bow control a little bit better. Unfortunately, family sometimes are ruthless, and they'll just speak their mind to you. And unfortunately, sometimes in the beginning of learning violin, even the first 2 years, sometimes it just doesn't sound so good. Okay, but it should improve, and if it's not, I maybe you can watch my sound production videos. I have many in that series, so you can watch, what you can do to improve your bow control and your sound production. But anyway, I just wanted to, speak to that. Thought it was important.